how much I love when we get people on our podcast, which is meant for people who have an interest in Freemasonry, which makes this so much fun, that are going to talk about something significant in Freemasonry, who aren't Freemasonries or Freemasons, and spoiler alert, also aren't men, which I love about this. As we welcome the very wonderful Dr. Ann Bunch to the Craftsman Online podcast. Welcome, Dr. Ann.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really great to be here tonight.
And she provided visual aids to our live streamers. You'll see I'm holding up her book. It's the definitive work here. It's the William Morgan Affair, Masonic Mystery in Upstate New York. And I know we have never done the podcast murder mystery episode here for us. And honestly, I think we would actually have the most ultimate murder mystery story that is still a cold case 200 years later. Before we get into your book and the very meaningful work and the investigation that you did into it, why don't you tell our audience, our listener, a little bit about yourself, what you do professionally and what led you into William Morgan and Freemasonry in Upstate New York?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So I am a forensic anthropologist by trade, and I am from upstate New York. I came from Medina, so born and bred here in this area near the epicenter of the Morgan Affair. My education took me to basically start to study bones in archaeological sites. So I worked in South America, got my degrees, ended up getting into academics, just pure academics at Loyola University in Chicago, then at University of Kentucky, and then shifted gears dramatically to work not in academics, but for the Army. And the mission of this laboratory that I joined in the mid-90s was the MIA POW recovery mission. So to search for, recover, and identify missing in action service members or civilians from past conflicts. So I did that, but that's where the missing person focus of my research started. Eventually, I moved back to home, basically. I went from Honolulu to Oswego, New York. So questioning my sanity, questioning my sanity is definitely open for the table is open for that. My students wondered about me too when I started to teach again. But I worked there and began to consult for medical examiners, Onondaga County and now Monroe County as well. So I'm still involved in missing person searches, identifying unidentified Jane and John Does. I am now at the State University of New York in Brockport. So that is where I currently am and working in the Criminal Justice Department.
This is going to be such a fascinating episode because, like I said, you were kind enough to share the book, The William Morgan Affair. And what I found so interesting about it is that as we talk about a cold case and you being a hands-on forensics, we're going to talk about bones and skeletal remains and all the sinewy stuff. But then also you kind of had to fill in some of the gap with history and actual research because of it's 200 years old and these people aren't around to go investigate and talk to anymore. So to start our listener off who might be unfamiliar with who William Morgan is and what the Morgan Affair was, it really kind of goes back to the 1820s and this kind of, as you referred to it, the burned over district. Like, what was life like in upstate New York at that time? And who was William Morgan and how did he get this path to become a Freemason?
Right. So, yes, this was an interesting time period. And the historians talk about this part of Western New York, possibly part of Central New York as well, as being basically an area that was kind of, seeking change. There was a bit of upheaval going on, seeking leadership, reform movements in Christianity were popping up and popular. I have a quote from Robert Morris, who has wrote quite the real seminal volume on this case, and he said, Amidst the prosperity, there were elements of opposition. There were causes working, coals upon which it only needed the popular breath to be blown to kindle into flame. So there's something societal going on that just needed a little bit of fanning for a fire to develop. So I think there was also a feeling of maybe have and have not at the time. So that is explored by Dr. Morris. And I definitely heavily quote him in my chapter about that time period where there was just some angst, societal angst going on. Who was William Morgan is a great question, because there are almost two William Morgans that are presented pretty much regularly, but one seems to be more popular. If you go to museum, the Holland Land Office Museum in Batavia, if you go on, just Google William Morgan, you will see one version. It is the scholarly William Morgan, who is a gentleman. And then there's the other depiction of William Morgan that is presented in Dr. Morris's volume, and I also have it in my book side by side. And he's a bit of a different character, a little bit unsettled, a little bit disheveled. They called him a boss crank, quote unquote. So somebody who may be a little volatile. Apparently he got into Masonry by supposedly being a member of the Leroy Lodge. And there was no question of that initially, apparently, but eventually there was a petition for a lodge to begin in the city of Batavia, and his signature was on it in support of that. But what I've seen historically reported is that eventually the final petition to start this lodge did not have his signature on it. So Morgan apparently discovered that, felt excluded, and then animus developed between himself and the local Freemasons.
So the only thing I know about Batavia is, of course, William Morgan, his origination. But I'm looking it up. I can't remember if it's the Batavia Mud Dogs or the Batavia Muck Dogs, the minor league baseball team.
Muck Dogs, right.
Because it's just something you don't forget.
Right.
And it's interesting being a Freemason. In full disclosure, I'm a Freemason originally from the Albany, upstate New York area. So I'm very familiar with William Morgan and the story of him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you talk to Masons about this, is you never hear that William Morgan is a good guy. He's always the villain of the story. And I guess the big question is there's different versions, and we're going to get into kind of the myths that surround the Morgan affair before we get into some of the real structural evidence. Is the story of him being a printer or working in a print shop and threatening to print the secrets of Freemasonry in some sort of expose, does that still check with you?
Yes, that does. That came after this disgruntlement. So what I gather is that he found others that were disgruntled. Enter David Miller, who was in charge of a printing press and had the ability to print, and encouraged William Morgan at that point to print the secret rituals of Masonry. So, and there were others that were wanting to fund this and kind of taking that side. And that is one thing that I get into in the book, is to talk about, well, where did this attitude come from? Where could people have gotten this kind of, disdain or resentment or disgruntlement, if you will? So David Miller allied himself with William Morgan in this endeavor, and apparently was putting pressure on him to, let's get it done, let's print it, are you ready to go? That kind of pressure from one side. So yes, that was real. He didn't have a printing press himself, but he certainly had access.
And just for our listener, for the historical context here, when we talk about the 1820s, so in America at that time, as weird as this sounds, like Western New York was, in Ohio especially, was considered like the frontier. Like it was no man's land. New York State was not the Empire State. The canal system that we know that brought it, that wasn't happening yet. People were still traveling by horse.
Right.
Guns had one shot in them. Being a Mason, while it means a lot to us now in modern times, it meant even more back then
Right.
socially in networks. And the
Right.
thought of George Washington, yeah, he was the first president, but he had already moved on, and we were a couple presidents deep by the
That's right.
time this all started to happen. So
Right.
just to help people out here, like when we talk about, his eventual disappearance of September in 1826, America was a much different, and especially New York State was a much different area than
Right.
what we thought of here. And this
Right.
is what I really liked about your book, The William Morgan Affair, The Masonic Mystery in Upstate New York. I'll help out our listener. If you're looking to get this, there's going to be a link to buy the copy of this book on Amazon in the notes for this episode. Just open it up when it plays. Dr. Ann did a fantastic job. I mean, the
Oh,
research, the
thank you.
historical. I used to watch CSI a lot. I thought I was like reading an episode of, history CSI Batavia at certain points. Especially when we get to this part, because I like the straight fact of this is what was going on. So walk
Yeah.
us through the established verifiable facts, not the myth of the disappearance of William Morgan.
Right. Right. So yes, September 1826 is the timeline where William Morgan basically vanishes. But it's a little bit of known facts that come before there's a disappearance. So September 11th, 1826, William Morgan responds to a claim in Canandaigua, New York, that he has committed a petty theft. So apparently he did not return a shirt and a cravat that he borrowed, which technically could be called theft if you wanted to do that in a civil suit. So he responded to that claim, went to Canandaigua, and like you said, it's not like going to Canandaigua from Batavia today. It's a journey.
There's no throughway.
So it took some effort to get there, right? In the evening, I think of the 11th or possibly the 12th, I'm not exactly sure on the date, he is waiting for this hearing and is then seen to be getting into or being shoved into, so take your pick, a carriage, horse-drawn carriage. As you said, we have horse travel at this time, and the horse carriage is driven by Freemasons. He is taken out of Batavia to Ridge Road, right along the lake, and Route 104 for people who live here, and heads towards Fort Niagara. Eventually gets to Fort Niagara and then boards a small boat into the Niagara River, goes out towards the Canadian side of the river and stops. There are Freemasons that are taking him across. They get to the other side without him, with a separate boat to communicate with the brothers on the other side, and they're not ready to receive him. So apparently the plan was, let's get him out of Batavia, let's get him to another country. There's debate about whether this was something he agreed to and was part of, or was it against his will? So there is a big, there's a question about that. Since they were not ready to receive him on the Canadian side of the Niagara River, he was turned around and taken back to Fort Niagara and kept in the powder room. So this is where the original plan appears to go south, and a plan B kicks in, where he is held in a powder room, starts to get a little bit upset, maybe is given some spirits, and that doesn't help. Gets a little bit louder, people can hear, a little bit ornery and belligerent. And eventually the person that maintained the keys to the powder room is called away, I believe on September 17th, to go repair a lighthouse in the Canadian side of the river. He's gone until the 21st, and when he comes back, William Morgan is not there in the powder room. So somewhere between the 17th and the 21st of September, something happened to William Morgan, and that is when he disappeared.
And because 1826 is 200 years ago, we didn't have air tags, we didn't have cell phones, so it taking 3 days before you noticed that somebody was not around probably wasn't uncommon. Heck, even 30 days.
Right. And Giddens, the person who was repairing the lighthouse, when he returned on the 21st, he had given someone else the keys and the ability to manage Morgan and the powder room and the whole situation. That person's name I'm not aware of. It's probably out there, but something happened there, and the record doesn't reflect clearly what did happen. So then there's a couple possibilities there. There's a possibility that he was taken out to the river and pushed overboard, bound and unable to swim and support himself, or pushed over the falls. That's one possibility, is the river he meets his demise. The other possibility is he was eventually taken across to the other side, given a horse, given some provisions, was supposed to await his wife and children who were in Batavia, and disappeared alive on the other side.
Now, two things. When you say the other side and the falls, just for people that aren't familiar with that central western
Right,
part of New York, you're talking
right.
about Canada and the Niagara Falls.
Absolutely. Thank
Gotcha.
you.
And they weren't big tourist destinations as they are now. So there wouldn't have been a lot of
Right.
witnesses and people around on the boats
Oh,
with the
no.
little, yeah.
Not at all. No, not like today.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what makes this interesting. Now we're going to get to some of the fallout and how the William Morgan affair actually grew into a political movement and almost became the death of Freemasonry here, at least in New York and across North America. But let's get to where you get inserted in as an investigative, research-driven scientist, that's a forensic crime scene person. And that's
Right,
when we find a body in
right,
1827. When in
right,
1827, and where did they find it?
right. They find a body washed up on the shores of Lake Ontario in Orleans County. So that is the mouth of the Oak Orchard River slash creek that empties um, into the lake near Carlton, New York. It's now called Point Breeze. So there, a body was discovered, and it was a coroner's inquest was called, which was kind of an in-place autopsy that was set up after the British system. And what had to happen is a coroner would have to, every county had 3 coroners. A coroner would be called, they still do today. And then I think 12 people from the jurisdiction where the death was discovered or occurred had to be assembled. And they would basically witness what happened and kind of confirm, yes, this did happen. So they're witnesses to the whole thing. And the body was, basically treated according to protocol. Established stature, established gender, established, as much as they could about what happened. And they did say it did not seem consistent with Mr. Morgan.
Hmm.
So they were aware he was still missing, and they made a statement, no, the biological characteristics don't seem to be consistent with Mr. Morgan. They temporarily bury him in Orleans County, awaiting notification of maybe the next of kin or somebody who might know who he is. So they put out a news article, body found, Carlton, Lakeshore, Lake Ontario. And in Batavia and Monroe County, people get wind of this, especially a politician named Thurlow Weed, and they basically respond and want to see the body. And they call a second coroner's inquest. And they take David Miller, the printing press individual, Lucinda Morgan, the wife of William Morgan, Thurlow Weed, who has a printing press of his own in Rochester and is a politician in the New York State Assembly, and others, and they go and inspect the body and conclude that it is William Morgan. Okay. They bring the body to Batavia kind of on parade and actually set the decomposing remains out in someone's yard for a period of time. So they make a statement. Yes, and people say it was quite obvious and unforgettable that witnessed it, and then apparently bury him temporarily, albeit in this old cemetery on Harvester Road which I discuss in the book and have photographs of. So that's the second coroner's inquest.
Mm.
Yeah, and eventually family members of another individual from Canada hear that there's a body found, respond, give incredibly detailed description of the clothing that he's wearing, including sewing repairs done by his wife. Enough information to say, we know what, we probably need to do another inquest. So they do another inquest in Genesee County now, and eventually determine that this is not consistent with William Morgan. In fact, it is the husband of this woman and her son and friend who appeared to have the inquest called, and his name is Timothy Monroe. And so the body is exhumed and taken home to its final resting place in Canada.
Jeez. Okay. So as you're talking about this, I'm like, all right, I know that 200 years ago, bodies probably decomposed at the same rate as they do now, but
Right.
obviously there was temporary buryings, a lot of touching,
Right.
like investigating and crime scene police work was much different than what's done now.
Oh, yes, much different. The coroner's inquests, they did use similar processes if they could. For example, and this is one thing that really blows my mind, is that dental identifications are very solid even today. A forensic dentist is worth their weight because they really can, if they have the dental records. Now we use x-rays. They didn't do that in the past at the time of William Morgan, but they would basically look at dental records, and William Morgan did have very special teeth. He had something called double teeth, which are teeth that basically develop differently, and you're born with this condition. It might be noticeable, it might not. You're fine clinically, there's not going to be a problem, but people notice this about him. So to me, to misidentify an individual, Timothy Monroe, and say this is William Morgan, where Timothy Monroe's teeth were present, they weren't double teeth. So it seems
Mm.
very non-scientific to have even stated for a split second that those remains were Timothy Monroe.
And then I'm still trying to figure out, and I'm sure our listener might be in the same boat as well, like what was so special about William Morgan's disappearance? It wasn't like he was well known, maybe even well liked, or it wasn't like a public. It was, where was the outrage? I understand there's a loss of life, and everybody cares about that as a fellow human being. But what made
Right,
him so special that a member of the New York State Assembly was like, ah, I must investigate
right.
this?
Right. So this is why I couldn't avoid getting into history and politics, because this was integral into the case kind of continuing to have life.
Mm.
He's missing. He may or may not be dead, or he may or may not be alive. We do not know. But Mr. Weed was extremely interested, seemingly to kind of fan these flames of the coals that we were talking about, of dissatisfaction in the area, maybe resentment, maybe whatever it was, disgruntlement. There was some political aim to keep to, I guess, energize people, have a narrative, have a kind of counterculture point of view to drive home and get attention and maybe get votes
Mm.
for whatever elections were happening at the time. Supposedly, Thurlow Weed was confronted by individuals after Timothy Monroe was positively identified and taken to Canada back home. And Thurlow Weed was quoted as saying something about, well, it was good enough Morgan at the time.
Hmm.
So the good enough Morgan is the quote from Thurlow Weed. There's debate about whether he really said it or not. And on his deathbed, I believe he stated, I didn't say that. But the quote
Mm.
was still there and very interesting at the time.
Because I'm sitting here thinking, okay, this was all happening about 10, within 15 years of the War of 1812 and the sentiment that
Right.
Americans had, and thinking there's the have-nots, there's the haves and the
Right.
have-nots. So we've always still had that, economic issue. You're in upstate New York. There's really not a lot going on up there at that time.
Right.
Here's an opportunity to see some sort of movement or moment.
Right.
So
Right.
was it literally just the fact that, hey, this guy disappeared and supposedly three of the people that it disappeared with were Freemasons, and dun dun
Right.
dun, that's the
Right.
mystery?
Right. So yes, it was that kind of the who done it. We think we know. You all were angry with him because he was going to publish secret rituals, and it was that threat.
Mm,
And then the response to "Don't do it, please," the begging of the Freemasons, in the Batavia area, to try to dissuade him from doing that. So then taking him possibly by carriage, to Fort Niagara. Why was that done? So it just seemed like the fact that we're transporting somebody, even, and it hasn't been concluded that he was going along with it, because if we think about it, he was under a lot of pressure in Batavia. There were forces coming at him from both sides.
mm,
There's a witness named Whitney who had a lot of details about this time, and he said that he met with William Morgan. He was down. He was possibly even suicidal at the time, and maybe wanted to get out of the situation. So that is a possibility.
mm.
Um, but yes, I think just the fact that there was a movement to Canandaigua, and then physically putting him in a carriage and taking him elsewhere, um, guilt by association. And there
Right.
were people that stood trial for kidnapping, for conspiracy to kidnap. Those trials did occur in 1827 and after.
Right. And that was the another interesting turn in your book. You have a whole chapter on all of the imposters who stood up and said, "It was me, I did it." And then quickly
Right,
their cases
right,
were dismissed. And it was
right,
interesting, a few seasons ago, we had a Masonic historian, Brother Chris Ruley, come on, and he had talked about how Americans felt after George Washington when it came to the subject of Freemasonry, and that George Washington was beloved and trusted. And he's like, well, he was, but you got to remember who gets to write the history, the victors, right? And
right,
you think of like Shays Rebellion and trying to set up a federal government for the first time, and it still exists today, 200 years later, where you have two sides of a political party spectrum and people with
right,
different viewpoints. So not to take
right,
anything away from the loss of a human life, because as your book points out clearly, this still is a 200-year-old cold case. And
right,
in your William Morgan Affair book, in chapter 5, you talk about the Pembroke skeleton. And
right,
what I loved about this is when we earlier were talking about biological evidence and how things were preserved in 1826 and how it's different than today. But some of the diagrams that you put in that they were
mhm,
using to measure or
right,
examine, who was this Dr. E.A. Phillips, and what did you
right.
think about his findings?
Yes. So the Pembroke skeleton was something that I had not heard about until I started to get into researching the Morgan affair, and who William Morgan was and what happened. And it was a 1881. So we see it years later, decades later, he's back again.
Mhm.
And what happened was in Pembroke, near Akron, New York, there was a skeleton found in a supposed mine, or a quarry. And the skeleton was found. Along with it were found interesting, I guess we'd call them artifacts or personal effects. A ring with the inscription WM, a kind of metal lockbox with burned papers, but they were legible enough to see the word Henry Brown,
Mm,
and other items. Um, those two stood out because they're kind of obviously identifying the skeleton with the ring as a personal effect as William Morgan, or the implication is that this is William Morgan, and that the papers are implicating that Mr. Brown. Oh, yes, another word that was visualized was murder on these burned papers in this metal box. So E.A. Phillips did exist. He was a medical doctor in Pembroke. He had a microscope, which made him able to assess maybe the ring and the papers. Um, However, I found it very interesting when I read about the situation that the bones were sort of just shoved off to the wayside, and the ring, the personal effects, and the papers were sort of the focal point.
mm.
And it came up in local news first, and then literally like a day or two later, it hit the New York Times. bones found, William Morgan discovered, that type of headline. And I found it very interesting that there was no report on the bones at all. I asked the county clerk, is there anything? No. There was the ability at that time to look at the skeleton and make some determinations about the biological sex, the age the person died, whether they were an adult or not. For example, you could get some very basic information, their height. You could determine this, and their science was out there if people wanted to do it. But I was just fascinated when the bones were just like, okay, let's move these over here. Let's look at the personal effects, which would not today be an acceptable way to identify anyone. So yes, I found it interesting. He's a medical doctor, Mr. Phillips or Dr. Phillips, but he wasn't focusing on the biological information when he looked at the case. I also found it interesting there was no death certificate issued. You have to have a death certificate. If it's a skeleton or a body, you still need a coroner to sign off. If that is Mr. Morgan, then finalize this. So it just seemed like it kind of popped up and then it quickly went away.
And that's, I think, what makes it the perfect American mystery, as I kind of alluded to, like our Masonic mystery story here. Because I was going to ask you, like, how does this case stay cold over 200 years when it was at the time like a super popular incident, and all of this information has been coming out and still no one has cracked this?
Right. And I think that's because there's truly no physical evidence. I mean, the upshot is we don't have a body, and you can say that and go, yep, need a body. We don't have any evidence of any violent altercation or anything. We have words, and honestly, the ring and the box and the papers from 1881, those weren't retained either. So nothing is retained. You can't, when I think about a detective looking at a cold case, they come in, they're said, this is your case, just focus only on this. That's kind of how I treated this. You might get a file cabinet full of stuff, you might get boxes, but in this case, there's really
Nothing.
no boxes. Yeah. There's nothing. There's just, it's really claims, rumors, gossip, and claims.
Interesting. It's so interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure living in modern times and being a scientist, this had to frustrate you, because today we have AI, we have DNA, right, we have advanced genealogical research that we can all use. If we just had a little shred of something,
right,
we'd be that much closer to solving this. And for the Morgan family and for everybody, we could literally put this to rest.
Right. Exactly. And when I got to the tail end of my research, what I wanted to do is put in this book everything that I gathered, because there's a lot about William Morgan out there, but it's kind of in separate places. It's in separate books, booklets, even online. And I tried to assemble everything kind of in one place, and I'm sure it's not exhaustive. But as far as the suggestions about what happened, I did put them kind of in an orderly fashion and went through them to see and tried to vet as best I could. Mind you, when I was doing this research, I started in January 2020, and we all know what happened right around then. So traveling and going to Wisconsin to a county clerk's office and that kind of thing was not going to happen at the time. But I had the internet, so I was able to do a lot of work with census data and communicating by email and that kind of thing. So basically going through what the suggestions were as to what happened, besides saying he died at the hands of others in the Niagara River. Taking the alternate view that he made it across the Niagara River to Canada, that's a whole realm of possibilities. Apparently, in Batavia, since Mr. Morgan was missing, there was an effort to try to find him. And scouts were sent out to search for him on the other side and the Canadian side. And they did see him. This is the report back from 2 scouts that were sent out, that he was seen riding westward, and eventually, as he was trailed by the scouts or detected by the scouts, boarding a ship at Port Hope. So if that happened, then he could, all the other possible rumors, he was in Boston, he was in New York City, he was in Smyrna, Turkey, that all could happen after getting on that boat, that ship. But one of the things that really stood out to me that seemed to have a little bit more kind of evidentiary potential was this family claiming relationships to William Morgan on wiki ancestry, and there's
Hmm.
it's like an ancestry.com. There's a family, Morgan family in Utila, Honduras, who claim that their patriarch is William Morgan. And there's a William Grantham Morgan who was supposedly his son, whose photo is there available to see. And they claimed that it's about the right time that this could have happened, that William Morgan might have started a whole separate life in the Caribbean.
Hmm.
If that's true, then you can compare the family lines genetically. So he had a daughter and a son in Batavia that were very young when he disappeared. If he started another family in Honduras, we can compare the Batavia family line to the Caribbean family line and either use Y chromosome DNA, which would have to be a male relative. Now, he did have TJ the son. TJ had a son, but you would have to track that down genealogically to hopefully find a relative that's living today from TJ's line. And then Ward Grantham Morgan from Utila, Honduras, he does have plenty of relatives that have made their way back to the United States, San Antonio, I think California, there's some others. So they're out there to be compared in Y chromosome DNA, but this would mean you have to contact them, basically have them voluntarily contribute a swab, a buccal swab, and you could do that comparison. Yeah, another way is this forensic investigative genetic genealogy, which I didn't mention in my book, and in hindsight thought, okay, I should have brought that up. So this is to be determined, but this is done basically by genealogists who have access to genetic data that is either obtained by warrant or obtained because it's publicly available because someone checked that box when they turned their sample into 23andMe, Ancestry.com, and others. So the genetic genealogists could compare those two lines, the Caribbean line and the Batavia line, and see, do they look like they have a common relative? If you get too far away, we're all going to be fairly similar. But if you get close enough relatives to William Morgan, you could make that call with this forensic investigative genetic genealogy. So that's a non-invasive way to do this research and maybe find out if he did live on in the Caribbean.
Or you could just have them say smile and see if they got the double teeth thing going on.
Funny you say that. There's a person, when I gave a talk at the Holland Land Office Museum, one of the individuals who was there stated that someone, I guess the biggest draw for that museum as far as people buying books and going to the gift shop, their interest is in the Morgan case. And someone who turned up there previously and talked to the curator stated, well, yeah, I'm related to William Morgan. And he said he had double teeth. So you get these stories of I'm related. I think I mentioned one about a winery in Appleton where they said someone came to hear their ghost stories and drink their wine and said, we're related to William Morgan. I thought, I want to talk to those people. Where are they?
No.
So they pop up now and then.
So this has been, I have waited all day literally to have this conversation.
It's been great. Thank you.
Really enjoyed your book, The William Morgan Affair, The Masonic Mystery in Upstate New York. Dr. Ann Bunch is our guest. If you're interested, and this has just kind of teased you a little bit, you can get the whole book on Amazon, and we got the notes and the link to get the book from Amazon and then notes for this episode. I want to talk about chapter 6 and kind of get you out of here on this question.
Sure.
Chapter 6 was my favorite because you kind of started alluding to it with the what became of William Morgan, all of the rumors and myths and theories, the what ifs, or as kids today would say, well, in an alternate universe, this would have been the timeline. And so it's 200 years old. It's the coldest of cold case. If Morgan was not murdered by Freemasons in Batavia, New York, pick your choice of which way they would have done it. What do you think could have happened to this guy? You laid out a pretty convincing story that, hey, maybe he started another family outside of the country. But out of all the things you came across, what do you think is most likely what happened?
Right. So yeah, and that's the thing is you have to, if you're doing this kind of investigation, you need corroborating evidence. And I also like this idea of res geste statements, which are statements made close to the time of an incident. Now, and details are important too. If someone gives you sort of a flippant, sort of generic discussion, that's not as convincing as someone who gives a lot of details. So, me just going with the most detailed account of what happened, I think Whitney, describing, not confessing, but describing what happened, giving Morgan's mental state, his demeanor. Now, Whitney basically stated that he was meeting with William Morgan to help him to extricate himself from Batavia and to assist him to kind of get out of this tense situation, do the right thing, not publish the rituals, and maybe get himself back where he came from. He basically had a brewery in York, Canada, so Canada was not unfamiliar territory for William Morgan. So to get him back over there and set him up and get him out of this kind of mess that he was in Batavia,
Mm.
there's a lot of detail there given by Whitney. And then this whole Caribbean family, with the timing being correct, the family members basically talking about a family legend where every time a ship showed up at Udala, Honduras, the patriarch William Morgan had to hide himself because he didn't want to be detected by the ship. This is kind of their family legend that still lives on today.
Mm.
So I think the most detail comes from Whitney talking about him getting out of Batavia and how they were assisting, and then him starting this new family in the Caribbean. Just because there's more details and actual photographs and people claiming that they're related to him right there in front of you today.
Mm. I lied. If you're cool, Dr. Ann, I have 3 more things that I jotted down that I wanted to get.
Absolutely.
All right. Yes.
Sure.
Bonus time. Love it. Okay. So when we were talking about the idea of William Morgan being a Freemason,
Mhm.
I'm going to assume, and maybe you could share a little bit, like how much research you actually did into our ritual or what Freemasonry was about.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I did not research that at all. So
Okay.
that was not something I got into. Full disclosure, I have Freemasons in my family. My husband is a Freemason, my dad was a Freemason, and my son is a senior DMLA.
Okay.
But I did not get into any of the ritual or study that. In fact, anything to do with what was already documented, I kind of stepped back from. So
Gotcha.
even the court cases in Canandaigua, I basically said, if you want to read about those, they're available.
Okay. Well, the reason I
Yeah.
asked that question is because so our ritual, especially in the 1800s, and I mean, it'd been going on since the printing press was invented, was a way for people to try to get money, was or to create their own version or changes to ritual, was to print
Mm-hmm.
it because then it
Mm-hmm.
became official and we actually changed our obligation. So at some point, just say the words to your husband, hey, what's that one part of the EA obligation where you say you won't write things down when it comes to William Morgan? He's probably going to laugh because we specifically
Ah,
say, especially in New York, that we won't print or write any part of the
ah,
secrets of Freemasonry down. Now,
got it.
the being punishable by death part of that, we can talk a little bit about that because we say symbolically would punish ourselves, and then it gets into a very esoteric way. But the
Mm.
punishments of the obligation, very similar to pirates when they would betray each other with a code and how they would, I'm gonna chop off your head and throw your body here and burn this and do like just gory, gruesome stuff. And what's funny is when you're an entered apprentice and you're going through the obligation, if everything else about that experience that night didn't just freak you right out of your own mind, when you're saying these things back, you're like, why do I have to say this stuff? And it's because of people like William Morgan to where we had to take our obligations so serious, especially about writing, printing, or talking about some of these things. So I thought that was really interesting when you got into it because some people would be like, "Well, what was such a big deal about printing Masonic? Who would
Right.
care?" But back then,
Right.
oh my gosh, those
Right.
exposés, not only were they like a peek into this hidden secret world, because nothing shocks us anymore in
Right.
2026. Like we've seen
No.
everything.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I saw a guy get shot in the ear and was bounced back up like he was fine and became president of the United States. Like, couldn't be more
Right.
surprised. Like,
Right. We
uh,
can see it all.
it is, yeah, especially with AI and nothing's unbelievable anymore.
That's the
Um,
thing.
but yeah, but back then these exposés, so not only were they just like fresh, drama red meat for the general public, but also on the Masonic side, it was a way for a brother to advance, like, oh, well, I'd like to add a lecture or some fancy words into ritual. I'll just print out my own copy and start either selling it or giving it to people so that it
Ah,
becomes kind of the playbook that we use. So I thought that was
right.
interesting. The other story that I wanted to share with you is when you talked about the imposters. And I didn't want to
Yes.
breeze over that chapter because
Yes.
I found it kind of entertaining. Some of the people that stood up, it was like all the people that tried to take credit for killing Kennedy or any kind of assassination attempt that's happened since then.
Right.
Um, and I told you this earlier, parts of it. So, my lodge here in DC, we have a brother who, while he was petitioning, never shared this information with us. But then, after he became a master mason, so probably about a year of a time range here, we're all standing at the bar after lodge meeting one night. And I was like, so, Thomas, you had mentioned that you have like a family connection to Freemasonry. Like, was your grandfather a Mason? Your father's like, well, I don't know if you guys know much about this, but there was a murder in upstate New York. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, and I mean, you've probably gone through, and you had mentioned like all of these other people that you've talked to that have claimed that they were part of the Morgan
Right.
family or these imposters. So, this imposter syndrome, like,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you've heard where even as a researcher, you're like, no, no, that's not even close?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Why would people come forward and say they did something, when they didn't? And I did get into the psychological research, the criminological research, and found, that there's a number of reasons. And it's not the forced confession by violence. It's the voluntary false confession. So why would someone do that? And it seemed in these cases people were either doing it because it was a psychological, maybe a mental instability.
Mm,
They say sometimes you have a guilt about one thing, so you're doing this to expiate that feeling of guilt. The other thing was, maybe wanting to belong to the counterculture. So you're kind
mm.
of getting yourself some attaboys and pat on the back. Oh yeah, you did the right thing, and you you're just joining that side by making this admission, even if it's not true. And they couldn't validate any of the those that came forward. But I was fascinated because what it does is it gives more credulity to the claim that he was murdered. So
Mm.
the longer this kept going, you've got people stepping up, I did it. Well, that certainly makes it seem like it happened. And then people appear 40 years later, Valance, the deathbed confession. It just kind of keeps going. Somebody
Yeah.
continues. Somehow the flames are just fanned kind of continuously. If they get a little bit, they start to go out, we just kind of got to fan them again.
Yeah, that a picture of him like living a peaceful life well into his later years in the Caribbean. That's not really a sexy story to try to sell to people. Like you want something
Yeah, it is
gruesome,
not.
gory. Yeah, yeah,
It is not.
yeah.
It is not.
Very interesting. So I wanted to thank you again for coming on. Oh, by the way, I got to talk about Thomas because people are like, wait, you left us hanging there. The guy that says that
Right.
so his great uncle apparently was one of the Masons in Batavia that led off William Morgan. And so I was like, so what's the lore that your family has told? Because it's so controversial. There's so many different takes on this. Like, what
Right.
happened? Did he live? And so he's like, oh, and without even missing a beat. Oh, yeah, they killed him. It's like, oh, okay. Can you expand on that a little bit? He's like, yeah, they tied him to a raft and pushed him over the over the Niagara Falls. I was like, that's one of the theories I've heard.
That's
So
one of the state. Yep, that's
yeah.
right.
And I've asked him, I'm like, dude, with a story like that, like you could really write about it or talk about it, but he's the
Yeah,
opposite. He didn't want to come forward with it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it was the innocence of it where he's like, I didn't think you guys would honestly know much about. And I'm like, you have no idea what the Morgan Affair means to Freemasonry.
Right.
Because my mother lodge in Albany or Schenectady, uh, it was chartered in 1774. So
Wow.
they had this graph on the lodge wall that was, written with ink and pen by hand,
Right.
and you could see where the membership started going. So it started with like 12 guys, was up to like 24, then 33, and then boom, you see 1820s, and there's just this drop, and then there's like
Right.
dashes that just kind of
Right.
for years. I'm like, what happened here?
Yep.
And they're like, well, this was the Morgan Affair. And at that point, I was brand new, and I'm like, what's the Morgan Affair? He's like, oh, there was
Right.
this murder and it involved Freemasons and it was in, central New York. Although they said
Right.
like the Utica area. I was like, Utica? Okay.
Not quite.
Yeah. I was like, all right.
Close.
Y- but yeah, it really that lodges were shutting their doors.
Yeah.
Men were demitting from being a
Yep.
Freemason because it became extremely unpopular. I was like, wow, all because they killed this person.
Right.
Like, who was this William Morgan guy? I was like, and nobody really knows. It was just, oh, he was just some guy that was threatening to print the secrets because he wasn't happy with whatever was going on in his life or in the
Right.
lodge at that time. And it was just insane. Like the impact, the fallout of this was monumental.
It was devastating. Yeah, I was shocked when I was looking at that part of the story, was the impact on the lodges and just the political
Hmm.
flames, that came out of it.
Yeah, yeah. I can't think of anything in modern times that would have led to the rise of another party, a third party,
Ooh,
and that people would disavow being a part of this thing because we haven't seen it, at least in our
no,
lifetimes, and hopefully we
right.
never will.
No.
But probably a very, very scary time to be a Mason. The few lodges that did stay open were super secretive. That adds to a bunch
Mm,
of other changes that we now have in our ritual, especially here in North America, and some of the practices and traditions that we have in our lodge. Hence the part where I talked about, filling out your petition to join a lodge in your own handwriting. All of these
right.
things became these traditional things have just carried over from time to time.
Mhm.
So it did have a big impact then and still now. And that's where I wanted to thank our most worshipful grandmaster of Masons in New York, brother Stephen Adam Rubin, who put me in contact with you and said, hey, I've got
Yeah.
this great contact. She's written this book about the Morgan Affair. I'm like, we've got to
Yeah.
get her on the podcast.
Yeah.
So especially now, the timing of it, the bicentennial of this whole incident,
Right.
probably the biggest question to ask you for the podcast is, what do you think is the most important takeaway or thing for brothers to remember when it comes to what happened here? What was the lesson
Mhm.
here? And
Mhm.
how can we make sure that something like this never happens or tears apart our fraternity ever again?
Right. Yeah, that's a very deep question. One thing I would never presume to do is use what we think today and our, cultural norms and societal norms and foist them on people that lived in the 1820s, right? So presentism and history is absolutely a no-no. However, if you could go back and look at what happened, looking at the monument on Harvester Avenue there, where there's literally written in stone, he was murdered by Freemasons. It says it in stone.
Hmm.
On the internet, it says, find a grave. William Morgan's buried there in Batavia. So to me, it's extremely frustrating that these things are not based on any empirical facts. And I believe that what happened was the headlines kind of just ruled the day. And they just kind of continued to kind of take on a life of their own. Then you have people admitting to a murder that's not proven or even demonstrable. So I think the headlines kind of taking a life of their own And I understand people didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to enter the fray. They wanted to maybe rise above it. But I think cross-examination is kind of at the heart of our legal system, and cross-examination is basically debate. So I do feel like that there was not a voice, a counter voice, a defense. The people who did kidnapping and conspiracy faced a jury of their peers and were found guilty or not. So those trials did happen for the people that did those acts. But I just am very frustrated as an empirical, physical evidence type oriented scientist to have rumor and, like I said, just claims and words sort of rule the day for centuries.
Mm.
So I think, we can't kind of second guess what happened back then. People did what they did for good reason. But I do think the headlines and the political kind of aspirations took charge and really wreaked havoc on Freemasons at that time.
Mm. Can't say enough about it. The book is The William Morgan Affair, The Murder Mystery in Upstate New York. You can find the link to purchase it on Amazon in the notes for this episode. Our guest this week has been Dr. Ann Bunch. What are you planning on next? Any other writing projects? You got to take a break for a while?
Well, I actually have contacted a forensic investigative genetic genealogist to work with me on possibly researching the Batavia line of William Morgan and the purported possible Caribbean line. So I may be able to research that question in the future and with verified relatives get to the bottom of this once and for all.
Mm.
Once I started, I kind of can't let this go. So that's on the agenda for sometime in the future.
Awesome. Then there's a chance we could get you back.
That would be great. I really enjoyed it.
Nice. Well, until then, thank you so much for giving us some time here on the Craftsman Online podcast.
Sure. It's been great. Thank you, Michael.